So let's take up exercise number 9 of text completion. Let's take the first question. I'm going to read the question along with you, and then we'll see what the answers are. From the time the Mormon pioneers first arrived in Utah, a fervent goal of the vast majority of the region's residents was to overcome territorial status by gaining statehood. Statehood was considered independence in local affairs, with state officers chosen from and the electorate. So for the first blank, we are given a very clear indication of what is required, because here these pioneers, these Mormon pioneers who came to Utah, what was their fervent goal? What's the meaning of the word fervent? Passionate. Their very passionate goal was that they should overcome territorial status by gaining statehood. So what did they want to gain? Statehood. So what did they have right now? Territorial status. They had territorial status. They wanted, their fervent ambition, goal was to gain statehood. So what is that word we would use to describe this territorial status? Was it something they wanted? No. They didn't want territorial status, but they wanted statehood. So the word needed to describe the territorial status would be something negative, isn't it? So I wouldn't go for a positive word like rising. And what is coveted? Covet is to most desire. Something that you want. Something that you want for yourself is to covet. Something that you envy, something that you have greed for is to covet. Now, if it is coveted territorial status, it is something that is most desired. That would be very positive. So what is left with us? Yes, the inference to be drawn is territorial status was inferior. What they wanted was something more superior, which was gaining statehood. So for the first blank, we can very well say from the time the Mormon pioneers first arrived in Utah, a fervent goal of the vast majority of the region's residents was to overcome inferior territorial status by gaining statehood. Now let's go to the second part of the question. Statehood was considered independence in local affairs, with state officers chosen from and the electorate. Who is the electorate? The people who vote. And we are told very clearly that why did they consider or why did they want statehood? That's what the explanation is. Statehood was considered independence. Now, can statehood be considered subordinate to independence? Independence is what they must be wanting. So if it is subordinate to independence, it's no good having statehood. Now, it cannot be irreverent to. Tell me what's the meaning of the word reverent? Reverent, reverence, respect, esteem, veneration, deference. All these are mark of deep regard and respect. So, reverent therefore is respectful. Reverent, let us say reverent parent. You know, respect is what we give to our parents. So what is it when it becomes irreverent? Not respectful. Something that you do not give respect to becomes irreverent. Now, obviously, you cannot possibly say that statehood was not giving respect to independence. If it was not giving respect to independence, nobody would want it, right? So what is that we have? Statehood was considered tantamount to independence, equal to. You know, here when you get statehood, it was almost like you've got yourself independence. How? Because he says in local affairs, that is, you're getting independence in local affairs. It's equal to getting independence in local affairs, with state officers chosen from whom? From the electorate, from the people who are voting for them. And therefore, if the state officers are chosen from the electorate, then what would they be? They would definitely be option G, answerable to the electorate. So for the second blank, statehood was considered option E, tantamount to independence in local affairs, with state officers chosen from and answerable to the electorate. So the first blank, the answer is option C, inferior. The second blank, the answer is E, tantamount to. And the third blank, the answer is G, answerable to. Let's go to the second question. Today's income tax system itself seems to create a major continuing and growing incidence of tax dash. Under the pressures of a much larger internal revenue service, more dash information reporting requirements, increasingly stiff and numerous penalties, and a host of legislative initiatives, the problem is getting dash. The idea is very clear. There seems to be some problem regarding the income tax system. He's talking about many things: pressures of a much larger internal revenue service, more information reporting requirements, increasingly stiff and numerous penalties. If you have all these things, what will happen to the problem? Will it become reduced or increased? Absolutely. So let's concentrate on the third blank first. The problem is getting not moderated, reduced, definitely not universal, which is spread everywhere. It has to become. And what is exacerbated? Aggravated. When the problem increases, it becomes aggravated, and therefore the word aggravated is connected with exacerbated. So definitely the problem has become exacerbated. Now what are we talking about? We are talking about today's income tax system itself seems to create a major continuing and growing incidence of tax what? We have three options. Tax, option C says reduction. Now, if tax reduction is there, it's not a problem. It should be a blessing for all of us to have tax reduction, right? It cannot also be tax consolidation. Consolidation is when you accumulate everything and strengthen the position. Possibility is it's a problem connected with tax evasion, right? People are avoiding paying taxes. Now, why are people avoiding paying taxes? This question seems to tell us it's the income tax system itself which is creating this problem. Right? He says today's income tax system itself seems to create a major continuing and growing incidence of tax evasion. How is the system itself creating this problem? He is explaining. Under the pressures of a much larger internal revenue service, more dash information reporting requirements. So can it be boiled down? Option D. Boiled down would be to make it more condensed. You know, it can't be. It would make it easier. It can't be also comprehensive. When you cover everything and do it very clearly, that is comprehensive. It will make it very clear. It has to be. And what is cumbersome? Cumbersome is something that is very, very unwieldy, difficult to manage, unmanageable. When you have too much of information that you have to provide, it becomes cumbersome. So here what we have is, for the second blank, under the pressures of a much larger internal revenue service, more cumbersome information reporting requirements, increasingly stiff and numerous penalties, and a host of legislative initiatives, the problem is getting exacerbated. So the first blank, the answer is evasion A. Second blank, the answer is E, cumbersome. And the third blank, the answer is H, exacerbated. The third question. Unlike philosophers who constructed theoretically ideal states, she built a theory based on dash. Thus, although her constructs may have been dash, they were empirically sound. Who is this she? She must also be a philosopher. What are we told about her? That is she like the other philosophers or is she not like them? Unlike philosophers, we are told. That means she's not like the other philosophers. What did the other philosophers do? They constructed theoretically ideal states. The words that are used is they constructed theoretically ideal states. Now, something that is theoretical is in paper. You put it on paper and you leave it. Something that is theoretical is not something that is practically done. And the second is that it is ideal states. Ideal is something that is considered to be so perfect that it is not practically possible. So these other philosophers obviously were constructing theories which were not practical. They were too ideal. They were too theoretical. Unlike them, she built a theory based on. So what do you think you need to give me? Something that opposes their theoretically ideal states. So therefore, among the three options that are available to us, it cannot be conjecture. Conjecture is guesswork, assumption, supposition, right? That also may not be therefore true. That is not opposing the idea of theoretically ideal states. Nor does the word wisdom. See, wisdom comes from knowledge and experience. That doesn't mean nowhere does this particular question say the other philosophers were foolish and she was the one who had the wisdom. That's not what we are trying to contradict. What makes better sense is if they constructed theoretically ideal states, then she built a theory based on experience. That means on practical knowledge, experience. So for the first blank, the answer has to be experience. Thus, the conclusion, thus, therefore, although her constructs, what is this constructs? Her theories. Although her theories may have been dashed, they were empirically sound. On one hand, we are told, although her theories were dashed, there is a contradiction there. The contradiction says, although her theories were dashed, they were empirically. The word sound means based on logic, right? So therefore, sound makes it logical. Empirical is a word that is connected with the theory of empiricism. Empiricism is that philosophy which says everything and anything has to be, first of all, proved in real observation or experiments before it can be accepted as a fact. That means anything that is connected with empiricism has to be practically proven. It has to be practically proven. Therefore, empirically sound would mean practically logical. That means in reality it is becoming logical. So is this positive or negative? It is positive. Although her theories were dashed, they were empirically sound, says it's positive. That means this blank requires something negative. He's saying on one hand something not so positive, he ends up saying something very positive. So although her theories were, now what are the words we have? We are going to rule out undependable. Why? If it is practically logical, then it cannot be undependable. That is not a word you can use here and make logic. If it is undependable, then it is illogical. You got that? So therefore we rule it out. Now what has romantic got to do with anything here? Right? So we rule out romantic and undependable. What is that which is left? Inelegant, not polished. Elegant is stylish, polished. Elegant is something that shows a lot of, culture and lot of, sophistication. Now her theory may be very rough, crude, coarse, inelegant. That is a negative aspect because it's based on practical experience. But then the positive aspect is the theories were very practically proven. They were practically very logical and sound. So the second blank option would be inelegant. So the first blank is experience, option B. The second blank is D, inelegant. The fourth question. Of course, anyone who has ever perused an unmodernized text of Captain Clark's journals knows that the captain was one of the most dash spellers ever to write in English. But despite this dash orthographical rules, Clark is never unclear. Anyone who has ever perused the unmodernized text of Captain Clark's journals, perused, read carefully, examine, scrutinize. Anything that you check carefully, when you read carefully. For example, if I were to give you a document and ask you to sign it, what would you do first? You would peruse the document. You would carefully read the document. After perusing the document, if you tell me, I'm now prepared to sign it, it means you have now the confidence that you know everything that is there. So to scrutinize or to examine or to read carefully is to peruse. So here we are told that if you have read carefully, perused, what? Captain Clark's journals. Because unmodernized text, maybe this Captain Clark wrote this particular journals a long time back. So if you have read his journals, you would know that the captain was one of the most dash spellers ever to write in English. What kind of a speller? How did he spell his words when he was writing? We have no clue. We have it only later. But despite this dash orthographical rules, see the word orthography is connected with rules pertaining to spelling. Every language has certain rules governing us about how to spell certain words. You have them in English as well. So orthography is pertaining to the rules governing spelling. So despite this dash orthographical rules, now what we are told about his writing is Clark is never unclear. Now look at what he says. Never unclear. When you put two negatives together, it becomes always clear. Right? If I were to say, I am not unhappy, what am I actually saying? I am happy. Two negatives will become, negating them, they become positive, like you have in algebra, right? So here, he's never unclear, implies he's always clear. So, despite dash this orthographical rules, what does that despite tell you? Contradiction. So, if he's always clear, the implication is that what despite tells you that he did not follow the orthographical rules. He did not follow the orthographical rules. In spite of that, he was always clear. So for the second blank, what do we have? We have, yes, disregard for. When you disregard something, you don't care for it. You don't obey it. You don't bother with it. So despite this disregard for orthographical rules, Clark is never unclear. Now you can't have the other two options, partiality towards. When you have partiality towards something, you show special liking for it, special inclination for it. If he had a partiality towards orthographical rules, then he would be always following the rules. Now unpretentiousness, what is pretentious? Yes, to be very fake, to be very unnatural, to put on a pose, to pretend. You know, a pretentious person would be trying to fake things. He tried to project a reality which is not there. So what would be to be unpretentious? It would be to be very natural, to be yourself. That has no contextual meaning in this particular situation. So what we have is, despite this orthographical, that is disregard for orthographical rules, Clark is never unclear. So now we know that Clark did not follow the orthographical rules. So what kind of a speller would you call him? Would you call him a speller who's fastidious? Fastidious is a person who's very careful, who's very particular in maintaining perfection in his work. A fastidious person would be very, very, yes, very, very exacting, demanding in his perfection. Right? A person who's fastidious is also known to be very meticulous. A fastidious person is very meticulous in his work. So if he is fastidious, that means he is very carefully following the rules, and that's something we know he doesn't. Now, what is to be indefatigable? What is the meaning of the word fatigue? When do you become fatigued? Exhausted, tired. Fatigue is a sign of tiredness, isn't it? But indefatigable is a word that is attributed to be untiring. You know, it's not so much your physical attribute as your mental. When you're indefatigable means your passion and your enthusiasm is so much that you'll persistently continue to do what you're doing. For example, you could say a person like Anna Hazare is an indefatigable fighter against corruption. Someone who, in spite of obstacles, in spite of setbacks, doesn't lose his enthusiasm or his courage. So when you are indefatigable, you become courageous, you become indomitable, you become persistent, you become very, very passionate about something. Now, if he is an indefatigable speller, it means he is passionately spelling everything right. That is not our answer. It has to be definitely he's a defiant speller. See, what is the meaning of the word defy? It is to oppose, not everything, oppose the authority. When you disobey the rules as set by the authority, it could be your parents, it could be your college, it could be the laws of the country. When you break them intentionally, that's when you defy, to flout the rules. To defy is to flout, break the rules. Now, if you call him a defiant speller, what does it mean? He is not following the rules of a typical speller. So, anyone who has, of course, anyone who has ever perused an unmodernized text of Captain Clark's journals knows that the captain was one of the most defiant spellers ever to write in English. But despite this disregard for orthographical rules, Clark is never unclear. Going to question number 5. The tacit but time-tested correlation between law of a state and morality of the citizens is that when law becomes dash, morals are dash, making people uninhibited, and vice versa. Tacit, something that is not written anywhere, but implicitly accepted. Something that is taken for granted is tacit. You know, what do we call a person who's taciturn? Someone who uses very few words while talking, or who is very disinclined to speech. But the word tacit means non-verbal. So something that is implied. So what has been taken for granted? This time-tested correlation. Correlation is this equation between law of a state and morality of the citizens. What is this correlation? He says it is that when law becomes dash, morals are dash. Now let's see what he says for the second blank. Morals are dash, making people uninhibited, and vice versa. See, inhibited is a word that we use when something, anything that inhibits us, it is something that will lead to this kind of obstructions. Inhibited is obstructed, prevented, stopped from doing something. Now, morals are basically those laws that we have in the society that gives us this kind of inhibitions. It tells us this is wrong, you're not supposed to do it. This is the way you have to behave. This way of behavior is not considered to be appropriate. So morals are inhibiting forces. They are forces that put some kind of restrictions on us. But here he says people have become uninhibited. They have no inhibitions, no obstructions. So what do you think has happened to the morals? Morals have become relaxed. Exactly. What is to be relaxed? Means they have become very loose. There are no morals at all. So when morals have become relaxed, people have become uninhibited. And then he says vice versa. So what does that imply? The implication is law has to become strict. If morals have become loose, then laws have to become strict. If morals become strict, then laws have to become loose. You got that? So for the first blank, we have to have a word that says that laws have become very strict. So it can't be universal, it can't be accepted, it has to be despotic. So what is, or who is a despot? A despot is a dictator. A despot is a tyrant. A despot is a person who's taking complete control over you. He is an authoritarian, an autocrat. So when we call a country which is ruled by a despot, then people will have no freedom. So when law becomes despotic, that means it gives you no liberty, no freedom. So when the law becomes despotic, to compensate for that, the morals become relaxed. And therefore, the vice versa implies when laws become relaxed, then morals must become despotic. That's what it is. This is the tacit but time-tested correlation between the law of the state and the morality of the citizens. Is that when law becomes despotic, morals are relaxed, making people uninhibited, and vice versa. What is to be deified? What is a deity? A deity is a god or goddess, an icon, an idol. So when you deify someone, you make them into a god-like figure. You lionize a person, you worship a person. You know, that kind of hero worship kind of, thinking or behavior is when we talk about deifying. Okay, going to the 6th question. Project Blue Book, the Defense Department's project to study unidentified flying objects, UFOs, was dashed because of several factors. No UFO reported, investigated, or evaluated has ever given any indication of threat to the world, and there has been no dash that sightings categorized as unidentified dash technological development beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. Implication is very clear. No UFOs have been found, no information that is worthwhile is very clear. So for the first blank, we can say very clearly that this project Blue Book was discontinued. It was not established, it was not financed. So why was it discontinued? Because of several factors. No UFO reported, investigated, or evaluated has ever given any indication of threat to the world, and there has been no evidence, very good, proof that sightings categorized as unidentified. Now, I can't go for a word like represent technological development or restore. It has to be offer technological development beyond the range of present-day scientific knowledge. First blank, the answer is B, discontinued. Second blank, the answer is evidence, F. The third blank, the answer is H, offer. The 7th question. Scientists who are on the cutting edge of research must often violate common sense and must make seemingly dash assumptions because existing theories simply do not dash the process of newly observed phenomena. Now, cutting edge of research is always when you go beyond what is known. You go into the unknown territory and do research. When you're doing this kind of research, we are told that scientists must often violate common sense. What is violate in this particular context? Violate is, when you violate the law, what do? You break the law, right? So the word violate common sense means you do something that has no common sense. You break the rules governing common sense. So when scientists are doing research which is on the cutting edge of technology, they must break laws governing our common sense and must make seemingly dash assumptions. So if they are going to break common sense, if they are going to not, use common sense, then what kind of assumptions do you think they must be making? Definitely not C, vague, which is very ambiguous, very unclear. It cannot be inexact, which also means vague into a certain extent. It has to be preposterous. What is preposterous? When I say somebody is preposterous, I mean he's being utterly illogical, ridiculous, foolish. Sometimes what you would call as nonsensical. So here, scientists must make what seemingly looks like preposterous assumptions because existing theories simply do not dash the process of newly observed phenomena. Not establish, not home. Home is to go towards a direction. It has to be expound. What is to expound? Explain in depth. Expound is to explain in depth. So the existing theories, because existing theories simply do not expound on, explain the processes of newly observed phenomena. Therefore, scientists have to go and make something called as preposterous assumptions. Seems logical. Shall we do the 8th question? Okay, the 8th question. The interpretation of sequence genomes represents the next great dash to scientists. Interfacing, computing, and analyzing, they hope to provide dash of the gene sequences, which is of dash value to medical research, biotechnology, and the pharmaceutical industry. So, this interpretation of sequence genomes represents the next great dash to scientists. Challenge, boon, leap. Leap is to jump into the unknown. Boon is a blessing. Challenge is something that you have to take up and face it. Now, this is something that they have to do. They have to interpret, they have to interface, they have to compute, they have to analyze. They have to do a lot of things in this field to get more information about it. So what do you think it is for scientists? Is it a blessing? No. It's not a leap, it's not a boon. It has to be a challenge. The interpretation of sequence genomes represents the next great challenge to scientists. Interfacing, computing, and analyzing, they hope to provide dash of the gene sequences, which is a dash. They hope to provide what? Yes, they're doing all this analyzing, computing in order to understand it. Understand, he says, an understanding of the gene sequences, which is of what value? Yes, it is of great value, I would say, enormous value. So therefore, it is not sophisticated value, nor minimal value, but immeasurable. Measurable is quantifiable. What is immeasurable? Something that is so enormous that you can't even measure it. Of immeasurable value to medical research, biotechnology, and the pharmaceutical industry. The first blank, the answer is A, challenge. The second blank, the answer is E, an understanding. And the third blank, the answer is I, immeasurable. During the Baroque and Rococo periods in the 17th and 18th centuries, portraits became very important. In a society dominated increasingly by secular leaders and powerful courts, images of dash-attired figures, besides symbols of dash power and wealth, were effective in dash individuals' authority. So this, see, the Baroque and Rococo periods is that type of period where the architectural designs were very grand, very opulent, very showy. You know, during this period of the 17th, 18th centuries, portrait became very important. What are portraits? Portraits are also paintings. But how different are portraits from the normal paintings? They are painted on? No. See, paintings can be on any topic, on any subject. I could take a scenery and make a painting of it. I could take a bowl of, fruits and make a painting of it. But portraits are specific or to painting the image of a person. Okay, in those days there were no cameras, no pictures could be taken. So what did rich people do? They would appoint a painter and they would pose for him, and he would take some time and he would create a portrait of them which they would hang up in their homes. So these portraits, we are told, became very important during this 17th and 18th centuries. In a society dominated increasingly by secular leaders and powerful courts, the clue here is what kind of leaders were dominating and becoming very powerful? Secular leaders. Now, many times when we talk about India, we call India to be a sovereign, socialist, democratic, secular nation. Now, sovereign because we are supreme. Sovereign is a Latin word which means supreme. Implication is no outsider has any power over us. So we are supreme in that sense, we are sovereign. We are a democratic nation because our representatives, electoral representatives, rule over us. That means demos, the people have the power in a democracy. But we are also called a secular nation. Now, the secularism is something that most often get confused into thinking that we are a country that is religious. No, we are not a country that is religious. In fact, we are a country that is non-religious. Do we have a state religion? Does our government promote any religion? Can our government pass any laws governing any kind of religious rules? No. Our courts have no jurisdiction over laws pertaining to our religion. That means secular is always connected with the everyday business, which is not connected with our religious or spiritual activities. So when we talk about secular leaders, they must be connected with the business of the day, as opposed to the spiritual leaders who are connected with our not business of the day, but our other aspect of our life, our immortal selves, isn't it? We are talking here about spiritual leaders as connected with our religious thinking. So these are therefore non-religious leaders. You got that? They are non-religious leaders. They come from the common man. Now here he says, In a society dominated increasingly by secular leaders in powerful courts, images of dash attired figures besides symbol of dash power and wealth were effective in dash individuals' authority. So these images of dash attired figures, where do you find them? These images, what did we find in the very beginning of the question? Portraits. So these images must be found in the portraits. Who are being painted? These secular leaders are getting themselves painted in portraits. How are they getting themselves painted? As dash attired figures. Attire, your clothing. So how do you think they must be dressing themselves? They want to show their power. So you're going to dress yourself simply when you want to show your power? No. So it cannot be Spartanly attired. Spartan is very, very simple. Spartan is very austere, basic. Nothing is there. Definitely they will not be Spartan. And we are never going near the word religiously here. What is left? Opulently. What is opulently? Luxuriously, grandly. You know, they must be wearing clothes and jewelry which is very grand. So opulently attired figures besides symbols of dash power. What kind of power do they have? What kind of leaders are they? They are non-religious leaders. They are secular leaders. So what kind of power do you think they will have? Definitely not ecclesiastical. Ecclesiastical, option D, is another word for the church. The spiritual leaders will be called the clergy. The priests in the church are called as ecclesiastical leaders. These are secular leaders, so they cannot be ecclesiastical, nor religious, nor can they be royal. Royal would be born from kings, aristocrats. They are not, they are secular. So they have to be temporal. See, the word spiritual is opposed by one corporeal and the other temporal. The word corporeal means physical. We talk about the corporeal as the body, and we call the body corporeal because it is temporal, temporary, because we see the two components of a body. The spiritual is our immortal self that remains, we believe, religiously forever. The physical self decays and dies, it's a mortal remain. So that is your temporal self. So they are temporal leaders who govern only the physical activities, not your spiritual activities. So you see, for the second blank, we could say that these opulently attired figures, besides symbols of temporal power and wealth, were effective in dash individuals' authority. What were they doing, these portraits? They were affirming. What is affirming? Confirming, further supporting their individual's authority. What is blanketing? Covering, hiding, dissimulating. Again, it is something that is misrepresenting, not hiding or whatever. So the answers for the first blank is opulently, option B. Second blank, temporal, option E. And third blank, option G, affirming. The 10th question. Having displayed his art collection in a vast modernist white space in dash former warehouse, Mr. Saatchi has chosen for his new site its polar opposite, a riverside monument to civic pomposity that once housed the local government. There is nothing dash about the new location. The building's design is bureaucratic Baroque, dash style that is as declamatory as the task force report and as self-regarding as a campaign speech. Now let's go back to the first blank. Having displayed his art collection in a vast modernist white space in dash former warehouse. So, Mr. Saatchi has his art collection. Where did he formally display it? In this vast white space, modernist white space, which is a former warehouse. What's a warehouse? It's a place where you store your goods. He was displaying his artwork in this vast white modernist warehouse. Now what has he chosen for his new site? It's polar opposite. It's diagonal opposite, right? So let's look at the first blank option. What kind of a place is this warehouse? Can it be decadent? Decadent is overly luxurious. We are told the ancient Romans, they led a decadent lifestyle. Their life was full of luxury and pleasure seeking. Now this place is not decadent because it is a warehouse, nor can it be claustrophobic. You know, the word phobia is connected with fear. Claustro is connected with small places. So, claustrophobic would mean it's a very, very narrow or confined space. Okay, now can this particular warehouse be claustrophobic? What are we told it is? It's a vast, wide, modernist white space. So nowhere can the word claustrophobic fit in. What is left? That should be our answer, isn't it? An unprepossessing former warehouse. Prepossessing, attractive. Prepossessing, attractive. He has a very prepossessing manner. Charming, attractive. So therefore, what is unprepossessing? Unattractive, ugly, right? So here, having displayed his art collection in this space, which we are told is unprepossessing, a former warehouse, Mr. Saatchi has chosen for his new site its polar opposite, a riverside monument to civic pomposity that once housed the local government. Now, where is he now displaying his artwork? In this former government house, right? It's a civic house, it's a government house. And how is this place? It is described as a monument to civic pomposity. Pomposity, pomp. Yes, gaudy show. His marriage was celebrated with great pomp by his parents. Pomp would show a lot of fanfare, a lot of color, a lot of display of money and wealth. So this particular building is described as civic pomposity. When do you call a person as pompous? When he's very showy, when he tries to brag, boast, display himself. So this building obviously displays itself very grandly, right? It is the polar opposite of the previous building, which was very bare and unprepossessing. And we are told that this building was the opposite. There is nothing dash about the new location. What is it? It is very grand. So what is it not? See, the same rule. It is, we are told already, very pompous. It is grand, this building. So it is not simple. There is nothing simple about this building is what I require for the blank. Nothing meaning not. So nothing cannot be therefore atavistic. Now atavistic means primitive. You know, the ancient primitive man was very atavistic. He was very close to animals rather than the human beings that we are today. So that is not having any context. There's nothing pretentious. In fact, this building is very pretentious. It's very showy. What is left? There's nothing spare. You see, the word spare can be used in so many ways. I have a spare tire. Extra. But then a person can be very sparing in his words. How? Very limiting. When you restrict it to the basic requirement, it becomes spare. He is sparing in his expenses. A person who is sparing will be very restricted and limited. That means if there's nothing spare about this building, it means it's very grand. There's nothing limited about its designs. There's nothing simple about its design. So the only answer that is making sense for the second blank is there is nothing spare about the new location. The building's design is bureaucratic Baroque. You know, in the previous question, question number 9, we did discuss the Baroque and the Rococo periods. I said Baroque and Rococo, is a word that we associate with architecture that is very grand, lavish, very, 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 ornamental. That kind of designs are called as Baroque in their settings. So this particular building is bureaucratic Baroque. Bureaucracy because it belongs to the government and it is very lavish, therefore it is Baroque. So what would you call its style? The idea becomes very simple for the second blank. Its style cannot be ascetic. Who is an ascetic? No. An ascetic is a hermit. An ascetic is what we would call in Hindi as a sadhu, a mendicant, a person who renounces his worldly life. What kind of a life will he have? Very, very simple, austere life. So there is you can't call the style as ascetic, it's very grand. Nor can you call it as understated. Understated is something that, does not project itself. It may be grand, it may be expensive, but on the surface it looks very simple. But this is looking very grand because he says it has got a declamatory style, it is as pompous or self-regarding as a campaign speech. So I would call it as a grandiose style. So for the third blank, If I say there is nothing spare about the new location of the building's design is bureaucratic baroque, a grandiose style that is as declamatory as a task force report and as self-regarding as a campaign speech. So the first blank, the answer is C, an unprepossessing, let us say, warehouse. The second blank, it has to be, there's nothing spare about the new location. And the third blank, it is a very grandiose style. When we seek dash our enemies, it is commonly out of a desire to better our own condition, one of being harassed and tired out with the state of war, and of a dash some adversity averse to us. When we seek dash our enemies, it is out of a desire to better our own condition. What is our condition right now when we are fighting with our enemies? We are harassed. We are tired out with the state of war. So in this particular situation, what would you want to do with your enemies? Yes. When we seek reconciliation with our enemies, what is to reconcile? To make peace with someone with whom you're having a dispute or disagreement, to get back together with someone with whom we have had a fight. So when we seek reconciliation over our enemies, with our enemies, it is commonly out of a desire to better our own condition, one of being harassed and tired out with the state of war, and of a dash some adversity averse to us. What's an adversity? The word adversity, adverse, adversary. You see, adverse, counter, against. Anything that counters us, anything that opposes us, anything that is against us is adverse. What are adverse conditions in life? When we face failures, when we face difficulties, when we have any reaction that is against us, it is adverse. You take a medicine, you have an adverse reaction if you break out into an allergy, right? So adverse is something that is opposite or against you. So the word adversity, therefore, is the time when we face opposition, difficulty, failure. When we face any form of ordeal. An ordeal is a tough time. When we face any kind of setbacks, when we face any kind of, failures, we call them as adversities. So who's your adversary? The word we have here, your enemy. Your adversary is your opponent, your enemy, isn't it? So here, he says, when we seek, it's very clear, not triumph or superiority, but we try to patch up with our enemy. When we seek reconciliation with our enemies, it is commonly out of a desire to better our own condition, one of being harassed and tired out with the state of war, and one more reason why we want to seek that reconciliation, of a dash some adversity. So what, when we think that we are going to face adversities, what do you feel about it? You feel scared, isn't it, when it is averse to us? So what's that word there then? Yes. And of a fear of some adversity, averse to us. The first blank, therefore, is option A, reconciliation with. The second blank, the answer is D, fear of. The 12th question. The art of Sumerian civilization as revealed by excavations at Ur, Babylon, and Kish, among other cities, was one of dash power and originality that influenced all major cultures of ancient Western Asia through its techniques and motives that were made widely dash by means of cuneiform writing. The question gives us very clear understanding that the Sumerian civilization and its art was very powerful, isn't it? So it was one of what kind of power? The first blank, it can't be trifling, which is very, very petty, small. It cannot be circumlocutory. Circumlocutory would be long winding, roundabout, makes no sense. It has to be very simply enormous. The art of Sumerian civilization as revealed by excavations at these cities was one of enormous power and originality that influenced all major cultures of ancient Western Asia through its techniques and motives that were made widely using this cuneiform writing, he says, using this pervasive writing. What is pervasive? Widely spread, isn't it? Its techniques and motives that are made widely pervasive by means of cuneiform writing, not circumscribed, limited. It has to be pervasive. So the first blank, the answer is enormous. The second blank, the answer is pervasive. The 13th question. The climate change debate is undergoing a dash shift from a dash preoccupation with the cost of addressing the problem towards an active awareness that bold steps to stabilize the climate could create some of the largest dash opportunities in creating new jobs of the 21st century. Now, this debate is undergoing what kind of a shift? From preoccupation, by being completely caught up with what is going to be the amount of money we are going to spend, we are now moving towards an active awareness. So this shift seems to be enormous, isn't it? So for the first blank, it cannot be digressive. Digressive is to wander away from the direction. You know, progress is to go forward. Regress is to go backward. Digress is to go side. You don't go to the direction in which you are going. It cannot be digressive because it's very much in the direction that is required. It cannot be unwarranted. Unwarranted makes it unnecessary. It has to be therefore seismic. You know, what are these seismic instruments? They measure the earthquake. So when there is an earthquake, what does it do? It makes a major shift. You know, it brings about a major change or a shift in the earth's, contours. So here, the climate change debate is undergoing a seismic shift, a major shift from a dash preoccupation. You know, when you're all the time thinking only about the cost, what will you become? Inactive, because he says now we have become active. So the inference to be drawn is for the first blank, second blank, it is a paralyzing preoccupation. What is that which paralyzes you? It keeps you inactive. It doesn't allow you to do anything at all. From a paralyzing preoccupation with the cost of addressing the problem towards an active awareness that bold steps to stabilize the climate could create some of the largest dash opportunities. What kind of opportunities? In creating new jobs of the 21st century. Now, the three blanks for the third blank, ecological, widespread, and economic, not economical. It should be economic. Now, when we are talking about new jobs of the 21st century, what kind of opportunities are these? These are not ecological, pertaining to our environment. It is not simply widespread opportunity. It has to be economic opportunities pertaining to new jobs of the 21st century. So for the first blank, the answer is seismic. The climate change debate is undergoing a seismic shift from a paralyzing preoccupation towards, what does he say? Towards an active awareness that bold steps to stabilize the climate could create some of the largest economic opportunities in creating new jobs of the 21st century. The option E, salutary, it means beneficial. Salutary means beneficial. You know, many times we learn salutary lessons from life. Many times our failures become salutary lessons. Our problems become salutary lessons because we learn what we should not do. Today, I constantly overspeed. But one fine day, I have an accident. I hurt myself. That accident itself is bad, but it proves to be a salutary lesson to me. It proves to be beneficial because I will not continue to do this kind of rash and impulsive things. My next accident could have been even worse. You got that? So therefore, anything salutary becomes extremely beneficial. That is not our answer. The 14th question. Experienced employers recognize that business students who can dash different points of view are ultimately more effective as managers than are the brilliant and original students who dash dogmatically to their own formulations. What is to be dogmatic? Yes, extremely rigid. Dogmatic makes you rigid, inflexible, and as you said, stubborn, and therefore you will not be willing to change or do something that others would want you to do. So here when we are talking about experienced employers, what are they recognizing? That business students who can dash different points of view, who can do what? Accept, Isn't it? Because these others, the brilliant students, are dogmatic. They are not willing to accept. So therefore, I would go with not discredit, which is to disprove, nor advocate, which is to support, but it would be better to use the word assimilate, absorb, isn't it? Experienced employers recognize that business students who can assimilate different points of view are ultimately more effective as managers than are the brilliant and original students who adhere. What is adhere? Stick. Yes, stick very strictly. Adhere dogmatically to their own formulations. Not revert or refer, but to adhere. So the first blank is assimilate. The second blank is adhere.